In the previous video, we learnt about the winding down of a manufacturing company. What we will go through in this video is to look at a similar situation for a bank and see how different it would be vis-a-vis a manufacturing company. As you might already be aware, the composition of assets and liabilities on the balance sheet of a bank is very different to a manufacturing company. Let's see how. There is very little difference in interpreting equity capital, retained earnings and long-term borrowings between a manufacturing company and a bank. Equity capital and retained earnings and long-term borrowings of 1500. A substantial part of the liability side of the balance sheet of a bank stems from the deposit it takes from customers, which in this case is 10,000, and an additional 500 which it has borrowed from the call money market. Therefore, the total liabilities of this institution adds up to 12,000. How has this bank deployed the 12,000 currency units on the asset side of its balance sheet? It has given loans of 5,000. It has invested in government securities or treasury bonds, as it is known in some countries, 2,500, corporate bonds 2,000, other investments 1,800. It has a cash, and the total adds up to 12,000. Now let's say this bank with a balance sheet size of 12,000 currency units goes insolvent. First of all, we need to understand what we mean when we say a bank goes insolvent. Insolvency normally stems from the fact that the bank's loans and investments are impaired. Now, what do I mean by loans and investments are impaired? Clients who borrowed from the banks are not repaying their loans, and or the investments that the bank has made are showing a mark-to-market loss. Say a bond that the company purchased for 102 currency units is today worth only 85 currency units. So it's sitting on a loss of 70 currency units on that bond investment. What this means is that the mark-to-market value of those investments have gone down. Now, how the value of bonds go down is something we would see in a later session. The important thing to bear in mind, though, is when the loans and investments get impaired, the deposit holders, that is, the customers who put their money in the bank, are the ones who get into a state of panic, because the customers are afraid that if the borrowers don't repay the loans or the bonds do not recover in value, the bank might not be able to repay the depositors when their money is due. Hence, the depositors start to withdraw their deposits prematurely. Let us say in the case of this bank, panicky customers queue up at the doorstep of the bank saying, "We want to withdraw our money." And let's say out of the 10,000 currency units of deposits that the bank has at the moment, 2,000 currency units are to be withdrawn now. Where will the bank find the money to repay these depositors who want to withdraw their funds? First of all, the bank would go and sell off the treasury bonds that it has invested in to the extent of 1,300. So the bond portfolio, which was 2,500, now becomes 1,200, and the 1,300 is raised as cash. The bank already has cash of 700, so now it has liquid cash of 2,000 currency units, which is what it would use to pay off the depositors' demand of 2,000 currency units. So the revised balance sheet of the bank now is going to look like T-bonds 1,200, corporate bonds 2,000, other investments remain unchanged at 1,800. So the total asset side is 10,000 and the total liabilities are 10,000. In other words, the 2,000 that was realized on the asset side has been used to pay down the depositors. So the deposits have come down by 2,000, and so the bank's balance sheet has shrunk from 12,000 to 10,000, What if this situation worsens? Say there is more bad news and hence more customers are scrambling to withdraw their deposits from the bank. Say the depositors now wish to withdraw 7,000 more currency units now. In other words, the bank's deposits are going to come down from 8,000 currency units to 1,000 currency units. And more importantly, the bank will now have to source 7,000 currency units of cash if they have to be able to meet their obligations to their depositors. How is the bank going to achieve this? It would sell off all its T-bonds and raise 1,200. It would sell off corporate bonds worth 1,500, and it would sell off other investments and 800 here. The total adds up to 4,500 currency units. Important thing is, the bank is not able to liquidate any more assets than the 4,500. Now remember, the depositors are clamoring for 7,000 currency units. By liquidating its assets, it has raised 4,500 currency units. So it still has a shortfall of 2,500 currency units, which it must somehow source to be able to repay the scrambling depositors. Remember, the bank cannot sell any more assets because all the liquid assets have already been sold off or liquidated. And therefore, the bank now has no choice except to go out and raise additional 2,500 currency units of capital. If a good Samaritan comes along and infuses 2,500 currency units, it would be able to bail itself out of the current situation that it has got itself into. The net result being the balance sheet further shrinks to 5,500. It has an additional capital of 2,500. It has got zero cash, and all of these investments are illiquid investments. So in other words, with this capital infusion, it was able to meet its cash outflow, but the bank's balance sheet is now frozen because it cannot liquidate any more of its assets. When there is a run on the bank, as we say, of the type that we just saw, where customers have already withdrawn 9,000 currency units, initial 2,000 plus a 7,000, the bank is in a very delirious situation. And if at some point the remaining 1,000 currency units have also got to be paid off to depositors, the bank does not have the resources and hence will simply have to fold up. The equity shares at this bank is 1,000, long-term debt 500, additional capital infused 2,500, deposits from customers 1,000, and borrowings from the call money market 500. All of these are stuck because none of these assets can be liquidated, and there is no more opportunity for the bank to raise resources except perhaps through another infusion of capital like our Good Samaritan who brought in 2,500, which seems immensely infeasible. Why is that the case? Because the bank has impaired assets like bad loans of 4,000 currency units which are non-performing and can never be recovered, corporate bonds of 500 currency units which are illiquid, other investments of 1,000 currency units which would also be illiquid and hence cannot be sold in the secondary market. This situation, you realize, is clearly different to the orderly winding down of a manufacturing company that we saw in the earlier video, where the loss on winding down the manufacturing company of 700 currency units was entirely borne by the equity shareholders. In the case of the bank, all the liability holders have had to suffer a loss because the bank had illiquid assets which could not be sold off.